A wounded Mustang horse emerges from the open range, its eyes pleading for help. Travis McCrae, a former Special Forces veteran back from Afghanistan, had only planned to check an old fence until the horse led him into the woods. There, hidden behind a locked cabin door, lay a dying girl and a long-buried family secret waiting to be uncovered. And that was just the beginning. The early winter wind swept over the slopes of Bear Ridge like sighs from the past. Snow hadn't yet fallen, but the chill had already sunk deep into the bone. Along the dirt road stained with old mud tracks, a silver-gray pickup truck rolled slowly forward, leaving behind a thin veil of dust settling over a landscape that had been silent for far too long. Travis McCrae rested one arm on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, though his mind drifted elsewhere. The wind slipped through a crack in the window, carrying the scent of rotting wood, wild grass, and loneliness. 13 years serving in the Special Forces across deserts and foreign mountain jungles, and yet it was this land, once called home, that tightened his chest the most. His father's cabin sat low in the scorched field, the tin roof faded, the fence half-fallen like a relic of another era. The whole ranch looked as though it had just stirred from a long winter sleep. Only no one had come to wake it. The front door hung ajar. Wind whistled through cracks in the wall like whispers of things left unsaid. His father, Roy McCrae, had passed away 3 months ago from heart failure. Travis hadn't made it back in time for the funeral. Not even a final call. Amid tense missions and back-to-back flights, all he received was an email from an old neighbor. "We buried him under the maple in the backyard. He used to sit there every evening, looking in the direction you left." Travis clenched his jaw as he stepped across the porch, floorboards groaning underfoot. The house hadn't changed, still simple, still cold, but now void of life. A rocking chair swayed slowly, though no one sat in it. On the wall, a faded photo of his mother stared down at him, her gaze laced with quiet reproach. Every corner of the house stirred a memory. The fireplace where he once roasted marshmallows as a boy. The coat hook where his father had always hung an unused riding crop, a symbol, never wielded, yet ever present. Travis dropped his duffel on the floor. It was light, just a few changes of clothes and a journal. Survivors of war didn't need much, just enough to leave again if necessary. That afternoon, he stepped outside. The horses his father had once cared for were down to a few skinny ones, silently chewing dry grass. They looked at Travis like he was a stranger, someone who'd been gone too long and now returned, hoping to find something in the fragments left behind. Near the edge of the property, where a section of fence had collapsed, Travis spotted a dark shape moving. A wild horse, he thought. But as it came closer, he noticed its limp, left hind leg injured, its sun-scorched gray-black coat tangled like dry brush. Amber eyes met his. Not with fear, not with retreat, but with something else. Travis squinted. "Where'd you come from?" The horse didn't answer, of course, but neither did it turn away. It stepped back once, then looked over its shoulder, then took a few more steps, as if leading him. By instinct, honed in war zones and long marches, Travis sensed something was off. He grabbed his heavy coat, tightened his boots, and followed. The horse slipped through the break in the fence, weaving into a narrow path that led through the pine woods beyond the ranch. Tall pines twisted in the wind, their bases thick with moss. Travis followed, cautious. His soldier's instinct tracked every sign, every sound, and the unnatural quiet of the forest around him. All he heard were hooves, the wind, and that lingering feeling of entering a forgotten world. Soon they reached a sunken hollow, roots tangled into each other, the ground dipped like a hidden bowl in the woods. And there, tucked beneath the shadows of ancient trees, stood a cabin, an old wooden cabin, shingles crumbling, moss growing thick, the front door sealed with a rusted iron bar. A strange scent leaked from under it, mildew, thyme, and something else, something that made the hairs on Travis's neck stand on end. Not the smell of death, but something close. The horse stopped and turned to look at him, its gaze firm, unblinking. Travis stepped forward, slowly placing a hand on the lock. Rust flaked off. He pulled hard. Nothing. Silence inside. No voices, no movement. He stepped back and kicked the door. Once, nothing. Twice, the hinges groaned. Third time, the door burst open, a cloud of dust rising thick into the air. He shielded his face and switched on his flashlight, pitch black inside. The stench hit him hard, making his eyes sting. The beams swept across the low ceiling, cracked wooden walls, and broken furniture. And there, in the center of the floor, was a small body curled up. A girl, motionless. Oh God! Travis lunged forward, knees crashing to the floor. The girl wore a torn coat, cheeks sunken, lips pale. Her breath was faint, like the rustle of leaves. "Can you hear me?" he whispered, shaking her shoulder. No response. He pulled out his phone. No signal. He swore under his breath, shoved it back in his pocket, and bent down again, gently lifting her. Every movement had to be careful, like handling shattered glass. Shadow, the wild horse, stood at the cabin's threshold, silent, unmoving, but present. Travis wrapped her in his coat, cradled her gently. "Hang on, girl," he murmured. "I don't know who you are, but I won't let you die here." Outside, the wind howled through the trees. A new chapter had just begun, born from the far edges of memory and guided by a soul that had never been tamed. Travis's flashlight cut through the darkness of the cabin, brushing over thick layers of dust, lingering cracks in the old wooden ceiling, and the haunting fragility etched across the face of the unconscious girl lying before him. Every shallow breath felt like a countdown, a clock ticking down on a life he wasn't sure he could save in time. His hand touched her forehead, ice cold. Far too cold for an early winter day with no snow. Her pulse was faint, skin dry and pale, body feather light, like the wind might simply carry her away. He didn't know her name, didn't know why she was here in an abandoned cabin deep in the forest, but that didn't matter. She was alive. And Travis knew that if he was even a moment too late, she wouldn't be. He tried to call for help. The screen read, "No signal." He tried again, and again, nothing. "Damn it," he muttered, stuffing the phone into his pocket. Then he knelt again and gently lifted the girl into his arms. Every movement was precise, as if she were made of brittle porcelain. Shadow was still there, framed in the doorway, not entering, not leaving, watching, as if bearing silent witness, as if guarding her. "All right, little one," Travis murmured, holding her tight against his chest, shielding her with his own body. "I don't know what the hell happened here, but I swear I'm getting you out." He stepped out into the cold air, the cabin's darkness closing behind them, only the fading winter dusk lighting their way. Shadow backed up a few steps, then turned, leading once again. This time, not just a guide, but an escort for the barely breathing girl. Travis laid her down gently on the damp grass near the cabin. He pulled off his outer coat, folded it beneath her head, then ran to the saddlebag, grabbing a scarf, a water bottle, and his ever-ready field med kit. Years in Afghanistan had trained him well. Assess dehydration, check for trauma, monitor core temperature. No blood, no broken bones, but bruises, deep ones, around her wrists, like she'd been tied for too long. Her throat was dry as dust. When he trickled a few drops of water onto her lips, her throat barely twitched. She needed a hospital. Fast. He gently propped up her head, dripping water between her lips, whispering, "Can you hear me? Just stay with me a little longer. Don't quit now, not after you've made it this far." A faint moan. He wasn't sure if it came from her or the wind, but Travis clung to that sound like a lifeline. He hit the emergency call button again. 1 bar, then gone, then back. He rushed to the clearing, lifting his phone high like a man begging the heavens. Finally, a voice answered. "Wyoming Rescue Dispatch. Please describe your emergency." Relief slammed into his chest like a heartbeat. "There's a girl. Unconscious, dehydrated, barely breathing. I don't know who she is. I found her in an abandoned cabin 5 miles west of Bear Ridge, near the Fallen Pines Forest. It's urgent. I repeat, urgent." "Can you give us an exact location?" the dispatcher asked. Travis scanned the forest. "Not precisely. No road signs, but I can guide them into the woods if needed. I'll light a signal fire if I have to. Just send someone, fast." "We're triangulating your signal. A scout helicopter is en route. Keep your phone on if possible." Travis ended the call. He knelt again beside the girl, still breathing, now steadier. He peeled off another layer of clothing, covered her, then gathered dry leaves and sticks to start a fire. The wind picked up, but he carried a windproof lighter, a gift from an old army buddy. The first spark flared, caught the tinder, and cast light across the grass, and Shadow's eyes, glowing amber at the edge of the clearing. Travis looked up at the darkening sky. Stars began to appear, trembling faintly in the ashen twilight. A soft sigh. The girl stirred. Her frail body shivered beneath his coat. Travis leaned down close, Hey, you hear me? You're safe now. I'm Travis. I'm staying with you until help gets here. She whispered something, barely a word, a name. Ellery. Travis smiled, barely audible over the wind. Hello, Ellery. Don't say anything, just rest. An hour later, searchlight beams swept across the forest. Shadow galloped in circles, whinnying loud enough to wake the trees. Medics dropped from the helicopter with stretchers, thermal blankets, IV bags. Ellery was lifted gently, hooked to monitors, given oxygen. One medic turned to Travis. You saved her. A few more hours and... He didn't finish. Travis didn't reply. He only nodded, eyes locked on Ellery. Shadow stood back, ears alert, still and watchful as ever. He didn't approach. He didn't leave. He stood there, wild and steady, as if he'd known this ending all along. When the helicopter lifted off, whipping wind into swirling leaves, Travis shielded his face, then looked over at Shadow. Thank you, he whispered. Without you, she wouldn't be here. Shadow let out a low nicker. Not loud, not fierce, just enough for Travis to hear. Then the horse turned, quietly disappearing into the edge of the woods. Not vanishing, just watching. Still present. That night, Travis returned to the ranch, but his mind no longer held only memories of a cold father, a broken house, or the guilt he carried. Now it held the image of a girl who survived, a fire burning out in the forest, and a Mustang, untamed, unclaimed, who had chosen somehow to lead him to exactly where he needed to be. A door had opened, not just the rusted one on the cabin, but one inside his chest, shut for far too long. The Wyoming sky stretched wide and breathless. Pillowy white clouds drifted slowly above Bear Ridge, as if silently watching all movement below. Travis McCrae sat beside an old split-rail fence, eyes following the quiet figure of the wild Mustang, Shadow, limping along with cautious steps. His left hind leg still bore swelling, but the gait was more stable than on that first day. Travis sighed, set down his coffee mug on the fence post, and walked slowly toward Shadow. He brought no reins, no saddle. He'd learned Shadow didn't care for such things. This wasn't a horse to be ridden. It was a free spirit, bearing the marks of a past no one had named. Gonna get that leg checked, old man, Travis murmured softly, voice gentle like the morning wind. I promise no one's gonna hurt you. To his quiet surprise, Shadow merely flicked an ear and then lowered his head, slowly following Travis toward the truck. Taking a wild Mustang to the local vet had never once crossed Travis's mind before now. But after everything Shadow had done, this was the very least he could do in return. Oak Hollow Veterinary Clinic sat at the end of a red dirt road, tucked beneath a grove of maple trees just beginning to turn gold. Dr. Eliza Monroe, a woman in her 50s with understanding eyes and hands as light as feathers, stepped out of the building with a curious look. Travis McCrae bringing a wild Mustang to my clinic. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't have believed it, she said, eyeing Shadow as though deciphering an unfinished story. Not what I thought I'd be doing on a Wednesday morning either. Travis chuckled, gently patting the horse's shoulder. But he saved someone's life, Eliza. He's earned this. Eliza nodded, crouched, and placed a hand over Shadow's swollen leg. Beneath the rough, gray-black coat and dried mud, the swelling had clearly been there for days. There are signs this horse was once saddled, ridden even. Not fully broken, but definitely handled, Eliza said. He belonged to someone. Or was left behind, Travis replied quietly. After the exam, Eliza prescribed pain medication, explained how to clean the area and apply cold compresses. He'll walk normally in a few weeks if you're patient. I've got time, Travis said. He's worth it. A week later, Lone Valley Hospital called. Ellery Whitlow was awake. Travis arrived that afternoon, sunlight filtering through the window and casting soft gold over the face of the girl he had carried out of that silent forest tomb. She was sitting up, a pillow behind her back, and her sea-green eyes fixed on him, as if trying to place a memory. You found me? She asked, voice hoarse and strained. I did, Travis said, taking the wooden chair beside her bed. Name's Travis. Travis McCrae. Shadow, the horse. Her lips trembled. I remember the sound of him. I remember feeling someone was near. Yeah, he led me to the cabin. Ellery closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, gathering strength to speak. I'm Ellery Whitlow. That cabin, it used to be part of my family's estate, Whitlow Hollow. My family owned most of the land around those woods, decades ago. Then, it all fell apart. Travis said nothing. He could feel pieces beginning to click into place. I found old letters in my father's chest, she continued, voice slow and deliberate. Letters from my grandfather, disowning my father over inheritance. A whole past, buried. My dad never talked about that place. But after he died, I had to know. You went alone? Travis asked gently. She nodded. I didn't trust anyone. My mom died a long time ago. She always said that land was the blind spot on the map of my life. But I had to go. I had to know why my father was disowned, why he lived like a man with no roots. She paused, gaze drifting toward the window. That cabin, it's all that's left of my family. Travis exhaled slowly. Something stirred in him, not the ache of war or the guilt from a father long gone, but recognition. A girl searching for roots, a man carrying loss. They were more alike than he'd thought. And now I owe my life to Shadow, Ellery said softly. You said you found me because of him? No, Travis shook his head. I think he found me and showed me the way. They fell silent. Not an awkward silence, but the kind that only those who've brushed up against death understand. No need for words, just the presence of another living soul. Ellery turned to him again. I want to go back to that cabin. Once I'm stronger, I need to look for the rest of those letters. I believe there's more left to find. I'll take you, Travis said. But this time, you're not going alone. She closed her eyes and let out a soft breath, like a burden released. Travis stood, his hand brushing lightly over her shoulder. Rest now. Shadow and I'll be waiting. When he stepped out into the hospital hallway, the evening light slanted across the corridor in pale golden threads. He walked to the parking lot, opened his truck door, and met Shadow's gaze across the corral fence nearby. She's alive, Travis said softly, nodding. And we're going back to that cabin. All of us. Shadow let out a soft nicker, then turned toward the fields, his pace slow but purposeful. As if the mission wasn't over yet. And for the first time since returning to Bear Ridge, Travis felt a path unfolding before him. Not one he'd planned, but one leading back toward memory, truth, and the healing of a family long torn apart. Mornings in Bear Ridge didn't begin with alarms. They started with wind whispering through the pines, hooves tapping dry earth, and the soft exhale of a man who was no longer a soldier, but hadn't yet fully returned to being a civilian. Travis McCrae stood on his porch, staring into the misty pasture where Shadow grazed silently near the crumbling fence. Today was the day. He would return to the cabin, not just to chase a hunch, but to follow the trail of a fractured family, a girl who nearly died, and the lingering shadow of a father who refused to leave his mind. He double-checked the pockets of his coat: flashlight, pocket knife, rope, gauze, water bottle. Instead of driving, he chose to go on horseback. He wanted Shadow to come, but wouldn't force him. When he opened the gate, the Mustang looked at him with eyes deep and unreadable. Then, without being led, without hesitation, stepped out and followed. "Coming with me, huh?" Travis whispered. Shadow didn't answer. He just walked behind him as Travis saddled another ranch horse, and together, they slipped quietly into the misted woods, the sun still hiding behind sleepy clouds. The cabin rose from the forest floor like a scar, twisted, weathered, but still standing. The old pines whispered secrets in the wind, and the sagging porch dipped low like it bore the weight of decades. Travis tied his horse near the trail and gave Shadow a subtle nod. The Mustang stood still, just beyond the clearing, ears flicking with the breath of the woods. Inside the cabin, the air was different, no longer heavy with rot and death, but still thick with memories. Travis moved carefully, entering the small side room where he'd first found Ellery. The floor still dipped under his boots, the ceiling stained with old water damage. But this time, something caught his eye, a low ceiling hatch near the top corner of the wall. An attic, maybe. Storage. He scanned the room for something sturdy. No chair would hold weight, but a broken table might do. He dragged it over, balanced himself, and reached up through spiderwebs to push the panel open. It creaked loud enough to startle crows from the trees. A dark void greeted him. He aimed his flashlight inside. Dust, old rope, and a wooden box partially covered by a rotting men's coat. His pulse quickened. He climbed in, crawling on his knees. The space was tight, forcing him to shuffle slowly, breath shallow. He pulled the box closer. Dust rose in clouds, stinging his eyes. Scrawled across the lid in faded brown ink, T. Whitlow. He opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with frayed string. The paper had yellowed, the handwriting soft and almost trembling. One envelope read, "To Mother and Father, April 1976. Another, "Do not open, unless you are my daughter." And tucked between them a copy of a will. Travis stared. It listed Thomas Whitlow, Ellery's father, as rightful heir. But his name had been crossed out by hand. A veil lifted. A secret long buried was breathing again. Before he could read further, the floor groaned beneath him, a sharp cracking sound. No. The wood split, like a frozen lake shattering. Travis dropped with a jolt, his head hitting a wall on the way down. He landed in a crawlspace, not deep, but enough to knock the breath from his chest. The box had tumbled into a corner. His leg was pinned beneath two warped boards. Pain flared up his thigh. Outside, Shadow whinnied, loud, sharp. Travis gritted his teeth and reached for the box, dragging it close. He yanked his leg free, gasping as wood splinters tore through his jeans. Blood mixed with dirt and mildew. He shouted, but the woods gave no reply. Then, boom, a loud thud hit the door. He looked up. Another thud. Shadow was kicking at it. "No, don't," he groaned. But the horse didn't stop. Again and again, the hinges shrieked and the door burst open. Shadow didn't enter. He reared back just outside the porch, letting out a piercing whinny. Travis understood. He crawled forward, dragging the box with him, the flashlight lost somewhere behind. He moved by instinct, inching toward the light pouring through the doorway, sweat soaking his back. He collapsed onto the porch, the box still clutched to his chest. "You did good, buddy," he panted. "You did good." That night, Travis cleaned the wound with warm water and antiseptic. The pain was sharp, but something inside him felt lighter. He picked up the phone and called Ellery. "I found your father's box. Letters, a will, stuff from the 70s. Silence. Can I see them?" she asked. "Tomorrow. But you might want to brace yourself. I've lived in the shadow of the past long enough, Travis. I need the truth, even if it breaks me." He glanced outside. Shadow stood still beneath the moonlight, dark and silent like a sentry. "We all need the truth," Travis murmured. Something had shifted in him. He was no longer just a man who came home from war. He was a keeper of memory. And in that collapsing cabin, in a place scarred by silence and secrets, he realized something vital. Some cracks have to split wide open before they can be mended with something stronger: forgiveness. Rain fell soft and steady that morning, a misty drizzle coating the weather-worn roof of the old barn where Shadow stood under shelter. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, Travis sat alone, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee, eyes fixed on the old wooden box resting in the center of the table. The fragile string binding the letters looked as if it held together more than just paper. It held together decades of memory, the weight of a family broken, not by blood, but by all the things left unsaid. When Ellery stepped in, her hair damp and tied back hastily, Travis rose to meet her. She didn't speak, just sat across from him, hands trembling slightly as he placed the box before her. "You ready?" he asked. Ellery looked at him, eyes dark with sleeplessness. "I don't think I'll ever be ready, Travis, but I've come too far to turn back now." He nodded, opened the lid, carefully handed her the first stack of letters. Ellery unfolded the top envelope, dated March 1976. The ink had faded, but the words still carried all their weight. Her voice wavered as she read aloud, "Dear Mom and Dad, I know I've betrayed your trust by choosing a different life. But please understand, I can't live forever as a shadow on Whitlow Ranch. I need to live my own life." She paused, breath caught in her throat. "This is my father's handwriting," she whispered. "He never showed me any of this, not a word." Travis said nothing, only slid a fresh mug of coffee toward her. Next came the will. Handwritten annotations scratched out Thomas Whitlow's name. Another letter, torn halfway through, contained only a fragment. "If that day hadn't happened, maybe I could have." "Never finished," Ellery murmured. "Just like his life, cut off." They sat in silence, reading one letter after another. By late afternoon, Ellery finally said, "I want to restore the cabin." Travis looked up. "Restore it? You sure?" "Not to live in," she clarified. "To preserve it. That cabin was where my father was abandoned. Now I want it to be where he's remembered." She held his gaze. "And if you don't mind, I'd like to stay here in Bear Ridge for a while." Travis nodded slowly. "I've got a spare room, but you'll have to get used to morning whinnies." She smiled, softly for the first time in days. "I think I'll be all right." The following week, Travis and Ellery began work on the cabin. They started by removing what had rotted beyond repair: the splintered door, warped floorboards, moldy roof panels. Travis hauled fresh lumber from a local mill. Ellery spent her mornings sketching a rough renovation plan in pencil. And every single day, Shadow was there. No one told him to stay. He simply did. He lingered near the fence line, always watching. Once, when Travis slipped while working on the roof, Shadow let out a loud, sharp whinny, just in time to make him pause before a broken beam came crashing down. Neither of them said anything, but they both knew. This wasn't just a horse. It was something else entirely. One Wednesday afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the newly replaced window panes, Ellery stood in the main room, the same room where she'd once lain near death. Now the floor was level. The ceiling stood tall and clean. Framed reproductions of her father's letters hung along the cabin walls. "I want to call it Whitlow's Haven," she said quietly, "a sanctuary for a story that nearly disappeared." Travis looked at a framed excerpt with the words, "To my daughter, I never stopped loving you." The handwriting was shaky, but it rang with truth. "That's a good name," he said. She turned to him. "Do you think people will come?" He shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not, but what matters is, you did what you had to do." They sat together on the porch steps. The breeze rolled gently through the trees. Shadow grazed at a distance, his ears always tipped in their direction. "I used to think I understood my father," Ellery said after a long pause. "Now I realize I never really did." "Same with mine," Travis replied. Everett McRae didn't talk much. He passed before I could ask the right questions. "Do you regret that?" "I do," he admitted. "But regret doesn't change anything. What we're doing now, maybe that does." She smiled faintly, resting her head against his shoulder. And just like that, under the golden wash of dusk, in a forest that once held only silence, two people, carrying wounds from two families, began something new. That night, back at Travis's home, Ellery began transcribing the letters by hand into a leather-bound journal. She refused to print them. She wanted to feel each stroke of ink, each pause in her father's handwriting. Travis, across the room, was writing too. By the glow of warm lamplight, he filled a notebook with his own memories, of learning to ride, of falling into a ditch after arguing with his father, of that final time they looked at each other and said nothing. "What are you writing?" Ellery asked, glancing up. "Just the things I wish he'd known." She nodded, then returned to her careful work. Outside, Shadow circled the fence quietly. Travis caught a glimpse of him through the window, standing just outside the porch, head low, posture still. "That horse," Ellery murmured. "It's like he's part of the house now." Travis chuckled softly. "Not part of it. He is the soul of it." And as if he understood, Shadow let out a soft, gentle nicker, barely audible, but carried far into the Bear Ridge night. A night where stories, once reduced to ash, were finally being rewritten by the hands of the living. The story of the forest cabin and the girl saved by a wild Mustang spread through the town of Bear Ridge like a gentle breeze. At first, it was just whispered between sips of coffee at Jackson's stop, then across the blacksmith shop, and soon enough, the children in town had given Shadow a name of their own: the horse that speaks. Clara from the general store recounted the tale with a dramatic hush to every customer. It stood right there by the old cabin's porch, watching over her all night. Who would have thought? But not everyone believed. Some chuckled, calling it coincidence. A few accused Travis of making it up for attention. But one thing no one could deny: Whitlow Cabin had come back to life. And with it, the memory of a land long forgotten began to stir. One early winter morning, with frost still hugging the edges of the pine woods, a flurry of tiny footsteps echoed along the dirt path leading to the cabin. Town children, clutching notebooks, crayons, and old trinkets, arrived wide-eyed, their expressions a mix of wonder and reverence. "Is this the place, Miss Ellery?" a brown-haired girl asked in a hushed voice, as if stepping onto sacred ground. Ellery nodded, gently touching the child's shoulder. "It is. And today, you'll be the first visitors to Whitlow's Haven." Travis watched from the fence line, his gaze warm. Shadow stood beneath the trees, dappled sunlight catching in his mane like strands of silver. As he stepped toward the children, they fell silent. "Can he smile?" a mischievous boy asked, holding out a slice of apple. Shadow sniffed gently, then accepted it, chewing slowly with calm, even grace. The children burst into gleeful squeals. "This is real magic," one of them shouted. Inside the cabin, Ellery walked them through each framed letter along the walls, faithfully restored reproductions of her father's words. She'd added notes beneath each, explaining the family timeline, the characters, the heartbreak. One letter read, "I didn't leave because I hated you. I left because my heart was split in two." Another read, "If the day comes when you return, remember, I never stopped watching over you." Grown-ups from the town began to trickle in, standing quietly before each letter. Some had known Ellery's grandfather. Others had worked under her father at the old horse ranch. Each carried a story. Each found a memory stirred. Mrs. Clare, the town's record-keeper, handed Ellery a faded black-and-white photo from 1952. It showed a young man on horseback, a wooden sign behind him barely legible, "Whitlow Ranch." "Your father was one of the best riders this valley ever saw," Claire said, eyes misty. Ellery took the photo with both hands, as if receiving something long lost that had finally come home. That evening, the cabin glowed with warm lantern light. Ellery hosted a small gathering, not formal, not rehearsed, just a quiet circle for those who remembered the name Whitlow and wanted to share. Travis built the fire. Old wooden benches were pulled into a ring. People gathered, flames flickering between them. An old man with a silver beard told of sneaking into the cabin to steal dried apples as a boy. An elderly woman recalled how Thomas Whitlow's mother helped her after her husband passed. Ellery sat listening, pen in hand, writing every story in her thick notebook. Occasionally, she glanced up at Travis, no longer just a stranger, but an anchor she hadn't known she needed. When the night deepened, Ellery stood. In her hand was a copy of the final letter her father had written. She read aloud, "If you're reading this, it means you've forgiven me. I never wanted you to forget the pain, only to understand that it taught me how to love." No one spoke, but across the fire, eyes met with unspoken empathy. It was a quiet night, but not a cold one, a small fire, yet enough to thaw hearts long frozen by grief. The next day, Travis received a letter, this one from the Northwest Veterans Outreach Program. They were inviting him to speak at a retreat for soldiers transitioning back into civilian life. He read the letter, said nothing, just slipped it into the desk drawer. That evening, he told Ellery, "I'm not sure I'm cut out for standing in front of people," he admitted. She simply looked at him. "Didn't you once tell me it's the things we don't say that end up killing us?" He chuckled, cornered by truth. The next morning, Travis stood on his porch, eyes on the fields ripening under new sunlight. Shadow lay in the grass, head resting on his foreleg, calm, peaceful, like he'd never carried anyone through the darkest of forests. Travis stepped down, crossed the yard, and sat beside him. Hand on Shadow's neck, he spoke softly. "You know, we think we're the ones saving someone, but maybe they're the ones saving us." Shadow let out a soft whinny. Whether in agreement or simply acknowledging the wind, Travis didn't know. But it felt like an answer. Weeks later, Ellery put up a handmade wooden sign at the trailhead leading to the cabin. Carved into it were the words, "Whitlow's Haven, where memories are rewritten." For anyone searching their way home, Travis joined her as she hammered in the last nail. "This place might change a few lives," he said. "At least two," she replied, eyes locked with his. A quiet settled between them. Not heavy, but like the pause between notes in a song that's still playing. They turned back toward the fire quietly burning inside the cabin. And behind them, Shadow walked, silent, steady, as if he didn't belong to anyone, but had somehow chosen this place to call home. Early winter in Bear Ridge had a stillness all its own. Not the dead silence of abandonment, but a gentle pause, as if nature was holding its breath to hear the final chapter before spring turned the page. Travis sat at the old wooden table in his father's kitchen, a ray of light slanting through the frosted window and falling across the leather journal in front of him. It was one he'd found tucked in Everett McCrae's desk drawer, the man who had taught him how to mend fences, how to guide a colt through shallow creeks, but never once said he was proud of him. The first pages were dry ledgers, breeding records, grain invoices, veterinary notes from the 1980s. But nestled in the middle, scrawled in a shaky hand, was this. "The boy didn't say a word when he left, didn't say much when he called, but if he comes back alive, I hope he forgives a stubborn old man." Travis ran his fingers over the blurred ink. Rain, maybe. or something else harder to name. He began to write, not military operations or commands, but forgotten memories of his father, of summer afternoons in the barn, of standing in silence after falling from a horse, pride more bruised than skin. And then he wrote about Shadow. Some wild souls don't need a halter to know who's breaking inside. That line he left untouched. Ellery sat across the cabin, now officially named Whitlow's Haven, the sign out front varnished and weatherproofed. She was transcribing her family's letters into a hand-bound book, line by line, slowly and deliberately. Each letter was a life not fully lived. Some had just a single sentence. "She has your mother's eyes." Or, "I'm sorry I didn't call it Christmas." One was the original letter renouncing the inheritance. "I can't keep this land if the price is my own son." Ellery copied every word. No tears. Only hands that gripped the edge of each page, like she was holding someone who'd almost slipped away. When she reached the final page, she wrote only 2 words. "I forgive you." In the living room, where windows looked out onto the horse pasture, Travis and Ellery often sat together in the evenings. Not much talking. Just the sound of the kettle steaming, the wind brushing the shutters, and sometimes the soft steps of Shadow through the grass. One night, Ellery asked, "Do you think he'll ever leave?" Travis shook his head. "He's free, but he comes back, every day." "Why?" He paused. "Because this is home." When spring arrived, they opened the cabin to weekend visitors. No big signs, no marketing, just word of mouth. Whitlow's Haven became a place where the young came to learn the land's story, and the old came to bury their own untold chapters. One corner wall became a patchwork of notes left behind by visitors, apologies to mothers, thank yous to fathers, scribbles from children. One child pinned a drawing of Shadow beneath the words, "The horse that saved a life." Ellery placed a small box at the front door. It read, "If you need to rewrite your story, start here." One soft golden evening, Travis took Shadow to the edge of the forest. They stood beneath a sky washed in late daylight. "You know," he said, hand on the horse's warm neck, "I used to hate this place. Thought it buried my father. But now, I think I'm planting myself here." Shadow stood still. His tail swished once. He looked toward the dirt road, where children sometimes came with carrots and whispered their thanks. Travis began accepting speaking invitations from veteran groups. Not to tell war stories, but to say what needed to be said. Once, he told a room full of quiet men, "I don't know if I was saved by a horse or by a woman brave enough to return to the house that almost killed her. But I know this: survival isn't a finish line, it's a road, and no one walks it alone." People applauded, but what stayed with him was a man, same rank he once held, who shook his hand afterward and said, "Thanks. I thought I was the only one carrying dreams that heavy." On the 1-year anniversary of Whitlow's Haven, Ellery and Travis hosted a gathering. No cake, just a bonfire, strong coffee, and someone playing guitar beneath the stars. Travis sat beside Ellery. Shadow stood behind them, dozing. A little girl asked, "What's the truest story you've heard here?" He looked at Ellery, then back at the girl. "The one we're still writing. You know the best thing about a story?" "What?" "When someone listens so it can keep going." A week later, Ellery received a package from a small press in Spokane. She'd submitted her family's story without expecting anything. Inside the letter, they wrote, "We didn't just read your story. We lived it. It's not just a book, it's a legacy." She ran to the yard where Travis was mounting a framed letter for the cabin. "They want to publish it," she said, voice trembling. "The story won't be forgotten." He set the frame down, didn't ask questions. He simply pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her back like a blessing unspoken. That night, they lit a single candle on the porch. The wind smelled of pine. The flame danced across their faces, not the faces of the broken, but of 2 people who had stayed and healed and rebuilt. Shadow lay nearby, eyes half closed. But when Ellery rose, the horse lifted his head, stepped forward, and gently touched his nose to her hand. "How long do you think he'll stay?" she asked. Travis smiled, eyes on the horizon. "As long as there's someone still trying to find their way home, I believe he'll be here to lead them." And as the last light of day disappeared behind the ridgeline, only 3 figures remained against the vastness of the land. A warrior who once lost his way, a daughter carrying generations of memory, and a Mustang, untamed, unowned, who chose to stay, where the wounded come to be whole again. If you believe that sometimes a wild soul is destiny's extended hand, drop a 1 below. If you've ever felt a strange, unspoken bond between human and beast, comment 0. And if the journey of Travis, Ellery, and Shadow made your heart skip a beat, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next story, where freedom, love, and life are told through the eyes of those who cannot be tamed.